Hello there. So for part 2 of this Lesson 0 Introduction to Macroeconomics, what I want to do is talk about data sources and graphing. Economics is a data science. Economics is dependent on what the data can tell us. Yes, there's an intuitive and logical aspect to it in the way of economic thinking, but I would say more importantly, does the data match what we think about? We need to be able to go to the data and test these theories. And in a principles course, what's even more important is getting people data and number literate. So whenever I teach my courses, I like to have them use the Federal Reserve Economic Data Tool from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. And really the easiest way to use it is use the FRED add-in, which will connect over 700,000 data sets available at the St. Louis Fed to your Excel program. Alternatively, you can go and do the work online on their website, and we'll kind of look at both ways to do that. So what we'll do is we'll call this replication 0. So this is, for the homeworks for my class, I usually give them replications where they're supposed to create a graph. And what you want to do is, for this one in particular, we're going to look at the real GDP, the real output growth of the U.S. economy from 1967 to 2020. And what we'll do is we'll construct that using the specific tag in the St. Louis Fed to bring in that data. And we're going to look at annual observations. You can get them in quarterly, but we're going to aggregate up to an annual observation. And we're starting in 1967, which for the purposes of my class, maybe I'll start in 1980, 2001, 2009, whatever. We can do this through both ways. So what we want to do then is we want to create a graph like this. This is the output gap. Actually, no, sorry, excuse me. I've led you all astray. I'm doing the output gap instead of real GDP, but here we go. Now, graphing is like writing. It's an art form. You want to communicate what you want to say, and there are certain decisions that need to be made in that. So notice with these graphs, the axes need to be labeled. What is the scale of what's going on here? The graph is titled with some information. We can see on this x-axis we're going over time, and it's not really full of a lot of different colors and designs. This is a simple black line that is meant to say, okay, above 0 expansion, below 0 contraction, and this particular one is a time series graph relating time, how this data set will move over time. We could also compare two data sets through a scatter plot. So as an example of this, I'm looking at the inflation gap and the growth of the exchange rate. So what we have in this case is a negative correlation. And we can see in this sense, as the inflation gap tends to get higher, growth in the exchange rate, the trade-weighted exchange rate of the U.S. to a number of other currencies, starts to contract, or at least slow down into contraction. And we can quantify this through a nice linear relationship that Excel will give you with a trend line. And looking at that goodness of fit, we can see maybe about 61% of the variation in this vertical axis related to the variation in this horizontal axis. That's a negative correlation. As this one goes up, this one goes down, and you see that nice diagonal line going. Now, if we were comparing, say, the yield spread from 1 year ago, which is supposed to be this kind of predictor of a recession, to, say, the present output gap, we see a positive correlation. As that yield spread grows larger, we start to see larger growth relative to a benchmark rate here. So let's see here. As we begin to decrease that yield spread, remember the signal of a recession is supposed to be a negative yield spread, a 10-year bond rate being overshadowed or overvalued relative to a 3-month bond rate or the federal funds rate. So we see a positive correlation here. It's kind of weaker, not as much explained by that goodness of fit there, but here we see that positive coefficient where we have this relationship of as the yield spread is going up, the present output gap is beginning to go up as well. We could also have no correlation. Now in this graph here, what you see with the output gap and the federal funds rate, what we see then is as the output gap grows, the federal funds rate is not really changing to any large extent. And we can see the R-squared being very, very low. Yes, this line is kind of, it's not as, we'd see like I'd say no correlation. You have this straight line here. But we can use these scatter plots to do that. So what we're going to do then in the next video is we are going to construct real GDP growth using the Phred add-in, and then in a video after that using the Phred website, so you can see sort of the nuts and bolts of how this goes together. But really the two most important tools that you can have in a Principles Macroeconomics course is to be able to compare what's going on with the movement of some particular set of data over time, or compare two series together and see if they have some relationship, or at least any visual evidence of a relationship, or if there is visual evidence of no relationship. All right, I'll see you in the next video.